How y'all doing? That's a lot of excitement for a 9 o'clock security talk. That's a little scary. I am concerned. Oh, wow. Well, this is crazy. So I got out of the military 9 years ago. So thanks to all of our duty servicemen and women and veterans, Canada, United States alike, thank you very much. You know, I was a heavy smoker for many years, 20 years in fact, and got really complacent when I got out of the military, which became a challenge for me for a bit. My style of exercise was moving couch to couch, which I got really good at. But this picture, man, 20 years ago, that's crazy. I was in shape, I was skinny, and all I wanted to do was work with computers, right? And I got that opportunity in the military, really set the foundation for what's come in my life, which is pretty cool. A couple years after I got out of the Navy, I was fortunate enough to team up with a couple great guys, Daniel Sid and Tony Perez, which some of you may know. He's our CEO at Sucuri, which together we founded, now going on 7 years. So many long nights cleaning malware, and I'm talking to the tilt. A couple hundred, few hundred websites a day were getting infected, sometimes averaging 400 or 500, and we were really competitive about it. Like, I am going to beat you. I'm going to close more tickets than you. I'm going to clean more websites to you. And you know, we bet lunches and all sorts of stuff that, you know, I was going to beat you for the month and what have you. But it was crazy, the amount of malware that we were seeing. Man, and still today, it's a really big problem. In 2012, Tony and I actually flew out to Brazil, into Brasilia, which is where Daniel Sid, who's our founding partner and CTO today, was living. And we were doing, I think, like a planning and forecasting meeting at the time. You know, we had these ambitions to grow and change the way that the security landscape was online, right? It's a really special trip for me. I quit smoking on that trip. I didn't take a pack of cigarettes. It was a bit overwhelming for the guys. In fact, frustrating to the point they wanted to choke the hell out of me more than once on that trip. You know, and I picked up a new habit. It's called eat all the things. Why are you laughing? Don't be judging me. It's a judge-free zone up in here, all right? No, and at the time, Daniel had been training Jiu-Jitsu for a few years. I think he was a blue belt at the time, and Tony as well. In another part of the world, right? We were in California. Daniel was down in Brazil and between there and Eastern Canada. And they would give me all sorts of hell. Look, Dre, you need to get on the mat with us, and you really need to make this part of what you do. You need to start training Jiu-Jitsu. And I told them, you guys are crazy. This is a spectator sport. I'm not getting involved with this. There's no way. And you know, I'm not sure if they were worried about my health or they just really did want to choke me at the time. And I still don't know if that's the case or not, but we moved on and I told them, no, this isn't happening. And instead of jiu-jitsu, I picked up another cheeseburger. It was great. It was delicious. By the summer of 2013, I had gained enough weight where I reached over the 270-pound mark. I was living large. Big boy. That complacency, man, it'll kick your butt. The couch is no joke. But around that time frame, something interesting happened, and it really changed my life in a lot of ways. And it's affected my business relationships, what I've done at work, my family, everything, the way that I feel about myself. It's great. They opened a Carlson Gracie Jiu-Jitsu school in the Menifee area, which is where I live. Tony told me, look, hey, why don't you get started Jiu-Jitsu with me here? I'm going to start and get moving. And I told him, man, again, spectator sport, this isn't for me. But around that same time frame, it was really odd. My daughter, my oldest daughter, so my oldest daughter is going to be 18 this February. She's graduating, going to nursing school, or that's the hope. She comes to me, Dad, like I want to start MMA. I want to be like Ronda Rousey. I want to be able to come in there and put my dukes up with folks. And I went, look, I don't know where this is coming from, but let's step that back a bit. Let's figure out your ground defense. Let's figure out a means for you to be able to intelligently defend yourself on the ground, and if that's something you want to pursue, then we'll push on from there. Your Uncle Tony, because Tony is my brother-in-law for those who don't know, it has started jiu-jitsu over at the school, the local school. Let's go check it out. And she said, you know what, let's do that. Let's try it out. Well, this, remember, spectator sport thing, right? Things changed. I told her, you know, it sounds interesting, let's go do it. She went and checked it out. I went over there with her and I met the professor. Really cool guy. She got to see her Uncle Tony on the mat. He was sparring. He was doing different techniques with the folks there, and I just see this look in her face of excitement. I went, oh, shoot. What's the deal here? What are you thinking about this? She said, I want to start like now. This is awesome, but I don't want to do it alone. The only way I'm doing it is if you get on the mat with me. Holy crocky, here we go, right? So, that really changed a lot of things. This picture here is not all inclusive. So I have 5 daughters, okay? My oldest one is, again, going to be 18. My youngest one's 6 years old. They have all trained except the baby at this point for at least a year and have all competed in Jiu-Jitsu. This has given them the ability to intelligently defend themselves, right? And my oldest daughter is the one that influenced this. She went, the next 3 wanted to do it, right? She actually broke her leg here this year, unfortunately, hiking, and has been off the mat, but is wanting to continue once she heals up. As for me, things got a little crazy, so I took it overboard. I've been now training close to 4 years. I train 3 to 5 days a week, and I compete about 6 to 8 times a year. Okay, so it's really changed my outlook, and it's gotten me off the couch. Now, how many of you know Jujitsu? You guys familiar with it? Any practitioners? We got one other. This is awesome. All right, 1 out of a lot. Shoot. Well, my whole objective may entice you here. So, little history. So, Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, which was really practiced as judo, was brought to the Gracie family in the early 1900s, 1914 or so. And the real premise of that after that, was to change the attitude of smaller folks and give them the ability to really tangle it with big folks and give them a better advantage, or at least equalize and not get their butt kicked, right? Oftentimes inexperienced folks end up on their back and they have no mechanism to defend themselves, right? So the whole action of the art was to neutralize that. And in turn, the Japanese meaning of Jiu-Jitsu is the gentle art. All right, so enough stories for the moment. My name's Dre, CISSP, and I'm co-founder of Sucuri. Before I started Sucuri, I was the CEO of a small agency. In fact, I went back and played in that space a little bit more in 2014. Tony took over as CEO of Sucuri, and I went back into the agency space for a couple years and was able to work with some pretty large projects with companies like Microsoft, Discovery Channel, and Campbell Soup. So, been a good experience. So I've played on both the security side and as well as the web development side of the house. Again, I started Jiu-Jitsu about 3.5 years ago, well after security and web stuff, and earned my CISSP well before my blue belt. Both big milestones for me and super important. Now, when I think about the complacency and my couch surfing and the spectator sport of that, my biggest regret with Jiu-Jitsu was not getting involved earlier. Okay, and we got to think about website security in that same context. It should not ever be a spectator sport. It's a journey, and it's something that's ongoing and iterative. We need to think about it before we launch a project, after it's in production, and beyond that, right? Because the whole name of the game is reducing risk. You can't just lay on the couch, right? I think there's 2 main points that I want you to take away from this, is thinking about security in a more holistic approach. We need to think about the bigger picture. And secondly, I would love one day for me to get some tweets or some type of correspondence from you saying that you joined Jiu-Jitsu and it changed your life, because I think it will. Now, the real kind of reasoning behind that story. Oops, I went past it a little bit. All right. So, anybody want to fight? No? All right. So let's see if I can tie this back into Jiu-Jitsu a little bit, but I've got some numbers and some info I want to cover that I think will help you give you a gauge as to the general online space and some of the risks and things that we're dealing with. Okay, so as of the last month, 1.1 billion active websites on the internet today. We reached the 1 billion club somewhere around September of 2014, so it gives you a kind of general idea of the speed or trajectory of growth. But 1.1 billion websites, that's a whole lot of tacos. When you think about all the awesome innovations and things that are happening there, you also got to think of all the nefarious activities that come along with that, because those that approach things in the right way are usually combating those that don't, right? So we're dealing with a lot of issues, and rightfully so. It's a big footprint. Out of that 1.1 billion, we're looking at 33% powered by some type of content management system. Now that's open or closed source. So it gives you a gauge as to websites out there with some type of control software behind them that maybe aren't controlled by some closed platform like a Facebook, a Twitter, what have you, right? So that's still a pretty big, significant number. And when you think about how those are all put together, they're The market share, 73% of that 33% is some type of open source platform, Drupal, WordPress, of course, Joomla, and Magento. Okay, those are the main four. There's a few other ones, but they fall off the spectrum in terms of the amount of percentage there. And almost 80% of all CMSs out there are open source. Now that to me, I mean, I'll clap for that one. Come on, open source all day. That's pretty cool. Now, the thing that I think really sucks about websites, vulnerability management through things like upgrades and updates are generally ineffective. They don't work, right? And it's not because, you know, it's not new news to us, and it's not that they don't work, it's just people don't do it. They don't get done, right? Like, and that's one of the biggest issues we see today. My question is, why is this occurring? Like, why is this a challenge for us, right? There's an interesting study that I'll reference here in a moment from Northbridge that analyzed a bunch of organizations and how they work with open source technologies. Oddly enough, that 33% number comes again. It's a total coincidence, but just like the CMS market share, Northbridge noticed that approximately 33% of companies out there had no process for identifying, tracking, or remediating known vulnerabilities. That is a challenge. Like, that's a big deal. 47% of those same companies didn't even know what open source technologies they were responsible for, right? So they're running the software in the environment. They have no idea, like they're just not doing anything with it, right? So it's sitting there stagnant, it's outdated, it's vulnerable. That's a problem. Excuse me. 50% of the companies had no one responsible for taking care of that open source code. So think about that for a moment. Do you draw any similarities to that in your organization or the clients that you're servicing? I mean, how often have you found that they're not doing anything with their security, or maybe you're not doing anything with your security, or you don't have anybody responsible for it? So now you're installing this software, it's running, it's meeting your purpose of maybe sales, marketing, whatever that idea is to having the website up, but you're not putting any controls in place to reduce risk of it being attacked, which has some major impacts. What about the technologies you're deploying? Are we thinking beyond Joomla? Are we thinking beyond that application and what that entire stack brings us and that attack vector, right? We've got a widespread attack surface when you start to think about what's underlying under that software, right? So you got all the components, extensions, and things that fall into the application layer, and then that goes into the server software, the actual server, the network environment. Beyond that, how are you connecting? How are you taking care of that site from where you're at? What does your Wi-Fi connection look like? Is your software at home updated? Is your machine infected with something that can be propagated online, right? The attack surface is a lot bigger than we know, or at least give it credit for. So the way that I think we need to think about this is a little different. Perhaps the biggest reason I can find why these problems exist is because of fundamental lack of or understanding of security. Or maybe we just don't care. I think we care. I think we just don't know in a lot of cases. Oftentimes we try to find the problem, but the problem's not new. This is something that's been pre-existing for a long time, and we try to find a quick fix to the problem. This reminds me of kind of the opiate issue we've got, at least in the United States. Like, I've got this pain because my neck's falling apart, and the doctor will quickly hand me a bottle of Vicodin to fix the symptoms, not the problem. So the underlying issue continues, right? We need to fix the problem. We throw tools at things, we don't understand what the intent of those tools are, and it's a bigger thing than that, right? The problem is meant to solve is, it's more important to solve that problem, not just find tools that may hide the issue. Security is much more about configuration. It's a mindset, right? It's a process. And it's a continual process. I think when we think about security, we need to think about it's the foundation of that. It's really three pillars. It's people, process, and technology, right? The tool's not gonna do anything for you if you don't have a really set instruction and idea of how to use that, a process to do that, and the right people to use that, right? You can't just throw a tool at it and hope that it's gonna work. So, I mean, at the end of the day, think about that. Like, if I'm a blue belt, so if I get on the mat with a black and brown belt and think I'm just gonna go in and armbar them, I mean, like, what's really gonna happen there, right? 9 times out of 10, if I go to compete at that level, because I am just not structured, I don't have the process or the tools in place to do that, I'm gonna throw an armbar at them, and by the time I realize what's happening, right, they're picking up my legs off the mat, and I'm waking up. It's a problem. I don't wanna go to sleep in a tournament, right? So think about that in the context of website security, all right? We need to put people, process, and technology in place so that we mitigate the risk of being put to sleep. You know, and just like on the mat, I think attackers are looking for opportunity, right? The reality of most website attacks out there is that they're automated and they're opportunistic. 95% of websites, in fact, out there that are attacked today are attacked out of some type of automated mechanism that's put out there. You know, these attackers know that there's existing vulnerabilities with, say, outdated software. Once again, we don't have resources around making sure that those software titles or that stack is updated. And they're automating these attacks. They're scanning for these vulnerabilities and injecting command and control. They're injecting malicious things to go ahead and do all sorts of stuff, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But 95% of them, right? Like, so there are targeted attacks out there, certainly. We've seen it recently here with the DIN attacks. How many of y'all saw that, where Internet of All Things was leveraged to send as much traffic and inundate at various layers, layer 3, layer 4, and layer 7 of the stack to take out a whole DNS network. They took out most of the eastern seaboard. In fact, Twitter and a bunch of major titles were taken out, right? So target attacks happen, but that's the minority, right? Everybody's website is a target. And when I look at vectors an attacker might abuse, we start to divide those really into 3 kind of key areas: external attacks, internal attacks, and reflective attacks, okay? These external attacks, think like SQLI, RCE type vulnerabilities. They're attacked remotely, certainly, while an internal attack, we're looking at things like cross-site contamination. Have you guys heard that term before? Right? So lateral movement in an environment, you've got 50 websites in a shared environment, and the next thing you know, your favorite website, the one that really means a lot to you, is nice and updated, it's taken care of. But the one downrange, it's running, you know, let's say XYZ software that's 2 years old, gets penetrated, and now that penetration allows for infection across all 50 sites in that environment. It's good times. That's an internal attack. Okay? And reflective attacks, which that's probably not the right term to use, but the idea there is we're talking about or describing things that aren't necessarily attacking the platform, maybe something external. Think about malvertising, or think about DNS, for example, that DNS attack. Okay? They attacked DNS and it took down the site. There's other instances where we've seen DNS providers get hacked, and all of a sudden your site's redirected. Right? So they didn't attack the environment, but they still were able to change the actual intended outcome of that site or use of the site. Attackers have an objective. Actions on objective refer to things an attacker might want to do with your web property, which now that's redirect, things of that nature. The impacts are going to vary really based on the organization and the audience. Distribution of malware is probably one of the most common use, right? So if you look at websites nowadays, that's the most commonly used distribution of malware. It's not PCs, it's not the endpoint like it used to be. It's really coming from the websites, right? So that ranges into attacks into infrastructure, and you start to see things like DDoS attacks, phishing attempts. There's the whole myriad of different attack types that happen here. And again, the number one distribution of malware is the internet today, websites. So the attackers are, they don't really care. I mean, they're just going to attack whatever they can. One of the big things that we see a lot of, and have you guys seen search engine poisoning attacks? Yeah. So you have awesome ranking, and man, you're just top of the world. The SERPs are spitting you out on every key term you were hoping for, and all of a sudden the site gets infected. And when your users go and try to click on a link, they get redirected to their favorite pharmaceutical company. You don't sell pharmaceuticals. That's a problem. In fact, it's growing. And at least 38% of the websites that we're seeing in our network in terms of infections are some type of search engine poisoning attack. Okay, a real problem. Now, with that, it extends beyond that, right? Because not only do I want to attack, but I want to have control of that website. I want to reinfect it or use it as part of my network. So to that same point, over 60% of the infected sites that we work with have some type of backdoor that's put into the site. Sometimes before, right? Like they find the vulnerability, they inject, they exploit the site, and they just put some type of file in there or some type of code. It doesn't do anything. It's really hard to detect because it doesn't have anything malicious. It's a command and control script, right? So a week from now, They go in and they want to do some type of DDoS attack or something of that nature. Now they have control of that site, and they come in and then they inject the payload to go ahead and use that and make it part of their network. So now removing these can be a major challenge. I think we need to remember that whether we see value in our own web properties or not, attackers do see value in it. And again, that's going back to what I just said, right? Like, hey, if we're going to attack, let's say Twitter, and we can't do that with the sole computing power of one site or another. They're pretty secure in terms of their code, but if I can overload them in some way, that's really interesting to me. So the more actual websites that I get into my network that I can use to attack these websites, the better. So it's a connected device, right? When you think about what your website does and what it is, and it can be added to a larger botnet and used for nefarious acts later on. Used to disseminate traffic and all sorts of things, right? So the redirect thing we talked about, there's a lot of different attack points. And they're becoming pretty, I think, innovative in terms of how they're attacking and the tactics they're employing. This is an interesting one. It's happening pretty widely now in the e-commerce space across various software titles. So what you're seeing is a difference between the attack that we would see happening before, where they would come in and infiltrate and redirect, things like that on e-commerce sites. What they're doing is they're using some type of redirect on the checkout pages, right? So they'll inject code and they'll create a third-party website that has the look and feel of your main website, right? And what they're doing is when customers are coming in and actually going to type in their credit card info and stuff, they think they're landing on that main page, but they're not. They've been redirected to this third party. They're not noticing that the subdomains, whatever they're using, sometimes they're using iframes to do this, right? And the next thing you know, you're putting your credit card info and you're buying nothing, right? So you've just given your credit card information out to some website in Russia, right? Some instances, what they'll do is they'll actually serve it to both places. So the transaction will still go through, but they're still harvesting the credit card information. All of a sudden, you're buying all sorts of cool stuff offshore. Bad news. The malicious site redirects, we've seen this off and on for quite some time, and it's not something that I think is going to go away anytime soon. Again, the DNS redirects is one that's really interesting and happening a considerable amount now in comparison to just dropping a payload on the site and then redirecting. So something to consider. And again, we talked about cross-site contamination. I think that's probably one of the biggest issues that we see, right? And you see that from a protective state, that's a challenge as well. So, you put a firewall around your website at the perimeter, that's great, but you've got 50 other websites on there, right? You can't protect all of those unless you have the firewall interacting with all of them. So it infects one and it infects all. It doesn't matter what perimeter defenses you have at that point, right? So the idea there is to make sure that all your stuff's updated and that you're protecting, or at least putting some type of security mechanism in place for each one of those. Look, it's really about risk management. And I think clearly defining your scope, right? What are your real objectives? And what are the restrictions that you're dealing with? And how are you going to go forward? The conditions of risk will never be zero. It's just a fact. You're online, you're at risk. And you got to understand it's a continuous process. This is not a set and forget thing. There is no silver bullet. And you can't just go, hey, look, I got some type of extension or something loaded. I've got a firewall and this is it. It just doesn't work that way. And you can't do everything, right? It's unattainable, so you've really got to prioritize around the controls that you put in place. I think that one of the most important things is to think beyond just the application layer or just the perimeter. It's about layer defense. There is no single solution or unique solution that's capable of providing 100% security or protection. It's just not realistic. Implementing controls that are overlapping, right? Kill all those gaps. One gets nailed, they peel back one layer of the onion, you've got the next one there to kind of help facilitate that protective layer. That's how you're going to mitigate attacks, or at least reduce your risk floor. So I hope that all these examples and things that I'm talking about give you a good sense of what you're dealing with. We talked a little bit about the attack surface. In terms of defense in depth, there's various controls that you can put across the entire attack surface, but it's well beyond just your application, and oftentimes we're stuck thinking about that. We need to think beyond that, right? What are the controls that I'm putting into the entire environment, the servers that we're using, the way that we're accessing? So how are our users accessing the sites? What type of privileges do they have? It extends well beyond just the platform, okay? So, I've tried to apply these controls in my Jujitsu journey. And I think my game's very different than it was when I first started 3-4 years ago. I've learned to build a strategy. I've learned to build layers of defense. There's plenty of guard playing that you can implement, as you'll attest. You know, attacks come from various directions. You need to understand that there's different controls that you can put in place. You know, you come out when you first start and you're so excited about Jiu-Jitsu that you're on the mat and you're going 100 miles per hour. You got what they call white belt syndrome. And it's kind of very similar to the web. You come out, you're excited about getting your property up there and doing all these cool things with it, and you forget about those fundamental controls. You forget about those fundamental risks that you're going to deal with. Eventually, you slow down, you learn, and you start to implement things that make sense for your site, for your game. And I think that from there you start to deal with the impacts a little better. And just like on the mat, in terms of website security, there's certainly impacts that we deal with. We deal with them from a couple different perspectives. The major impacts I see are really broken down into business and technical impacts. And they coexist, and I think that they interrelate. When you think about the loss of brand equity, the financial impact of having some type of breach, you know, and the emotional distress, it is frustrating. There's nothing more of a vulnerable feeling than getting attacked and getting your site taken down or redirected and what have you. It's a challenge. You end up getting blacklisted by Google and the other agencies out there, right? There's certainly the potential impact of SEO and rankings. And it's scary, right? We need to do better. So, it's a pretty quick discussion. I think I had way too much coffee this morning. And I hope the discussion was helpful for you. I hope you learned that we need to be a little bit more proactive, and we need to understand that it's an iterative process. We're always going to continue learning. This is a journey. Don't wait for the attackers to attack you. In fact, they probably already are, right? So you need to get more direct in terms of your defense and your protective nature. Be aggressive and calculated. I think most importantly, build a game plan, right? You need to have some type of a sustainable game plan. And it's beyond the tool sets, it's the processes that you build and getting the right people to do that. Layer your defenses, because one layer alone will not allow you to maximize your security posture. And close out the match. Don't be a spectator. Get off the couch, right? It's up to all of us to really be a part of this. After 3 years on the mat, I am finally on the verge of hopefully earning purple belt this year. It's been a crazy ride. I lost over 70 pounds. I think this is more important. I've changed my entire lifestyle. I've thought through what's important to me, and I've prioritized. My 5 girls are really important to me, and I think that Jiu-Jitsu's helped me gain the exposure I needed around how to take care of them in a better way, and myself. I think it's important to immerse yourself in whatever you do, security, Jiu-Jitsu. Learn intelligently, right? How to defend yourself. And I think that you have the opportunity to reach the podium. Be a champion. Be a champion for security. Be a champion for what you're involved with and passionate about. And maybe one day, you will join the gentle art. That is all I have for you today. Thank you. After you. Yeah, up to you.
Let's give another round of applause for Dre.
Thank you.
Got about 10 minutes for questions, so if you have a question, please stand up and we'll have someone with a mic meet you, and you can ask your question, and Dre will answer it. Anybody?
See, I saw you eyeballing me too, man.
Well, they're making it...
That's when it started. I said, you want to fight? He was like, ooh.
I can yell the question. Oh gosh, this reminds me of karaoke last night. It's not good. Security through obscurity. It's criticized, and I wanted to get your take on it.
It should be criticized.
Yes, so tell me, what do you think?
Hey, let's hide the user IDs because no one's going to find that. Are you kidding me? Like, you can easily find that type of stuff, right? There's so much silly insecurities out there that are caused by vendors and by folks that maybe don't understand what security through obscurity can do. I think it's important to really stick to the principles of security. There's a lot of different instances, I think, across various platforms where you see folks thinking that, hey, doing stuff like hiding user IDs is important. It's well beyond that. Let's not try to use those type of mechanisms. It's typically used as a scare tactic, right?
But hiding the Joomla administrator URL itself is a very common practice, and I'm just thinking it's something that, that is obscurity, and I think it does actually save a lot of sites from getting hacked.
I'm sorry?
Hiding the Joomla URL keeps a lot of brute force attempts from people, getting in.
It'll hide, it'll minimize, it will not go away completely because there's still mechanisms to find that, right?
Yeah.
So you're certainly reducing your risk floor. So I would say it could be helpful in that capacity, but you can't think that it's going to cure the problem, right? So, does that make sense? Yeah.
Anyone else with a question for Dre? Well, the mic's making it way to there. I actually got a question for you about your security reports that you guys release, listing kind of the state of security and what platforms get hacked and what percentages. I've noticed that WordPress is pretty high on the list. Is that just because there's more WordPress sites, or there's something inherently different about that CMS, or what's the takeaways from those reports?
So I would say that most open source platforms out there, WordPress included, are doing just a great job in terms of their core teams, making sure that code is secure, that it's updated and as appropriate. When vulnerabilities are released, they're putting out patches for the software pretty quickly. Yes, to an extent, I think it's the footprint of WordPress because it's got such a large market share. But beyond that, I think it's the extensibility at that capacity, at that scale, that's causing the challenges, right? So one, the lack of education in the space, which we talked a little bit about, right? Folks administering sites that really don't understand that inherent risks, security principles at large. But the software, the core, being okay doesn't mean that all of the extensions, plugins, and commercial integration points are secure. That's a problem. They're not coding to the same standards. They're not, the development life cycles aren't the same. They're not using the same security principles, and that causes a higher risk floor, right? I think that's the challenge that you're seeing. Certainly a bigger market share and just a lot of capabilities that are outside of the control of the core team.
Yeah, I think in the Joomla community, a lot of developers maybe edit core, break core, and the WordPress not following the WordPress codex and the WordPress way. So I definitely get that. Got a question over here?
Yep. First of all, I want to congratulate you on your physical transformation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's give us a hand.
Thank you.
And my question is just for a problem I keep having. I have a client who wants to have lots of people sign up, and I'm just hammered with fake signups. What do you recommend for that?
Ooh, that sucks. I think what we should do is talk about that afterwards. I'd have to understand the architecture of what you're doing there, right? So I'm not sure how to answer that appropriately. There's different ways to minimize that. It's just like even attempts into your login area, right? Like there's ways to minimize that, right? But without understanding the full architecture, I don't know that I can give you a valid answer.
Got another question over here.
Yeah, a little different question. Less technical question.
Good, because I ain't technical, bro.
Okay.
I'm good.
I run three different Joomla
Can you hold the
sites.
mic up to you?
3 different Joomla sites, and one of our highest level securities is backing up our sites at another location. Because as I hear before from our administrators, there are people that are constantly trying to hack into our sites. We have to keep up with the patch upgrades, but our biggest level of security has been backup. How secure is that when we're just backing up at another location?
You hit on a strong point, my man, and here's the deal. Soup Kitchen servers suck. What I mean by that is people don't only just have their production site there and all of their logs and their development environment and their staging environment and backups and who knows what the hell else there. That's a problem. Any of that stuff causes a higher potential for vulnerability, right? The first thing I'm gonna do as an attacker is I'm gonna come find what those things are in that environment. I'm gonna kill your backups and all your logs. So now you don't know where I'm at and you can't recover. That's a problem. Offsite, segment. You need to get all this stuff off and segment, right? So yes, you wanna have offsite backups, okay? You want backups of your backups. Bro, put it on a CD, get it in the cloud, have a couple backups, and keep that away from your production environment. The idea there, though, is the moment that server explodes because someone came and attacked it and it's wiped out, you've got a copy and you can come and reinstate. You minimize the amount of downtime, right? So segment, no soup kitchen servers. So, good question.
Do you subscribe to the rule of 3? If you don't have your site in 3 places, you don't have it?
I think that for me, that's probably the strongest way to do it, right? So I usually keep local copies and then I have remote backups.
Cool. And do you test your backups as well?
That's a good thing, right? So why not test that in a development environment, right? Okay. Yeah.
Cool. We got time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. We got one over here.
Wait for it, Mike.
You give your question and I'll come meet you. So, the gentleman right here.
So for search engine poisoning, been involved with a couple cases, and what we see, or what I saw, is that basically the attack is feeding Google different content than you would see as a user or an administrator. And if you didn't use Search Console to look at the site, really you could be oblivious to it. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about potentially how many sites are out there that nobody even knows that there's an issue going on.
That is such a challenging question to answer. I mean, there's new ones appearing every day, right? So there's not a number I can give you, but it is a real problem. So think to yourself, we a couple hundred sites a day we clean. I mean, I'm just giving you a number, and 38% of them have some type of search engine poisoning to it. Like, it's a lot of sites. It's a lot of sites. And it is a problem. Sometimes it's conditional too, right? Like you'll go, and as the administrator you won't see it, but they're serving, let's say you're on the West Coast, on the East Coast, they're getting all the Viagra ads. Good times, right? It's challenging. Yeah, it's a real problem. A big problem.
Cool. We got a question right over here.
Hey, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
A great presentation. I just started using your service recently.
Well, welcome.
Yes, and I'm going to be using it a lot more. I've noticed the hacks have been getting a lot more nasty recently. We're seeing a lot of when people, I used to be able to detect it when you could look at the file modified dates in there. A lot of the hacks I've seen lately they change that somehow, so you can't see. I mean, they're infecting hundreds of files without changing the dates. And you don't know, and then they wait a month or so before they do anything. I just want to recommend your service to fix that, because it's amazing. I mean, it found things that I didn't even know were there, and it is getting nastier out there. So I just wanted to say I really appreciate what you do. You've kind of saved my butt a bunch of times this year. So I highly recommend this service personally. So I just wanted to say thanks.
Thank you.
Let's give another round of applause for Dre. That's all the time for questions we have. But you will be at the Sucuri booth all day today and tomorrow answering questions,
Absolutely.
all right? Awesome. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Give him another round of applause.
Thank you.